let's get into really part two of today's show. And that's Brian Kelly and his comments. I don't know if it was yesterday, but I saw it reported yesterday where Brian Kelly made a comment about LSU not getting a defensive lineman in the portal, even though in the past they've said that they need one. And it's clearly an issue for them, and they just weren't able to have some success with it. And Brian Kelly made a comment, and I'm going to read you the comment here in a second. But the reason it matters and the reason I'm going to talk about it is, number one, it's an absurd comment that you just start getting I tweeted in response to it. I was like, this sounds so familiar because this is the kind of stuff that he would do at Notre Dame. I mean, so let's talk about his comments and why it matters. So obviously defensive tackle is a big need for LSU right now in the portal, developing their own players. They got some young guys with some ability, but there was a need to go into the portal and get some defensive linemen. This past year, LSU had one of the worst defenses at the Power 5 level. There's no doubt about that. You know, their defense this year, they gave up close to 38 points a game. They ranked 138th in total defense last season. They ranked 81st in scoring defense last year, gave up 28 points a game. In their losses last year, it really came down to the fact that they're as good as their offense was, they just couldn't outscore people. Give up 45 points to Florida State, 55 points to Ole Miss, 42 points to Alabama in their three losses. And they had a game last year where they had to win a game. They won games giving up 31, 30, 35, 39, 31 points. So the reality is you know, you're just in a situation where you're not nearly good enough on defense. Now you've got to go out and win without those three defensive tackles that were drafted this year, and without the offense. That's, I expect their offense to still be pretty good, but I don't think it's going to be as good as they were last year. Even if Mike Denbrock was there, it wasn't going to be as good as it was last year. But it's going to be even less effective because you don't have Mike Denbrock, who I think is an offensive coach, but you lost the number 2 draft pick and then at quarterback. You lost the number 6 draft pick at quarterback. And then Brian Thomas then got picked 23rd in the first round. And so you're going to need your defense to be better. I think LSU made some good hires. They went out and got a really good defensive line coach. They hired a new defensive coordinator that I like, who I thought did a good job at Missouri. But the reality is they're lacking players at certain key positions. Their secondary needs a lot of work, and defensive line definitely needed to be addressed in the portal, and they weren't able to address it. And so Brian Kelly was asked about this, and he talked about just, hey, we're not able, it's not going well. He was asked about, he said, it's not going well right now. And he talked about essentially they need to buy players. He says, we're not in the market of buying players, is what Kelly said. Unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They want to be bought. Well, here's my thing. There's some things in what Kelly said that are true. And when I look at LSU and I think of their situation, just looking at this as a college football analyst, and forget my any context of who said it. Excuse me, trying to get this chair moved. Let's take away any context of who said it. Let's take away any context of his past and the excuse making he's done. Let's just look at the context of what he said. Some guys just want to be bought. Couple things about this. Number one, there's truth to what he's saying. There are players that just want to be bought. I'm a believer that you don't really win at a high level if the only reason a guy came to play for you was because you had to pay him the most. I don't think that's a great way of building a roster. I think if you're a team that's like, you're just one guy away and you kind of know, look, we've got the infrastructure in place, leadership-wise. I've got the right position coach. We can kind of take this kid. He doesn't have the right attitude. We can pay him, and we just need him to play for us for 1 year. And there's incentive for him to do this because he's trying to be a high draft pick or something. I mean, okay, fine. But I'm not a big fan of getting kids who are coming to your school just because you paid them the most. So there's some merit to what Brian Kelly said. But in typical Brian Kelly fashion, it's not the merit. Like, I had to do this so much during his Notre Dame career, where I would say, what he's saying has some kernels of truth to it, but the manner in which he's going about explaining it is so poorly done. So if Brian Kelly would have said this, look, it's not going real well right now. We're still grinding. There's still some players we're talking to, but the reality is we're trying to build a team the right way. And we're not opposed to, look, I came to LSU. We're going to be competitive in the NIL market. We're going to do these type of things, but we're also got to make sure we're getting the right kind of fit. And if a guy's only going to come here because we're going to give him the most money, I don't know if that's the kind of guy that's going to really move the needle for us and provide us with the type of impact player that we need, who's going to be bought into what we're trying to prove. So we're still on the market for a defensive tackle, and we feel we're very comfortable with what we've got going on NIL-wise to where we can present some opportunities if a player's willing to buy into what we're trying to get done here. We're trying to go win a national championship. I came to LSU to win a championship. I came to LSU and I told all of you that we've got the resources here to be successful. That's why I left Notre Dame. Got a chef and everything. It's great. You guys won't believe the kind of meals our chef produces. And it's made me a better coach because I now make better decisions inside the 5-yard line against Northwestern. I don't roll my freshman quarterback out, throw interceptions in the end zone against Tulsa. I don't go for 2 when I'm already up 11 because our chef gives such great meals that my brain power is stronger, that I can make better decisions. But I don't think it's a smart decision for us to go out and say, hey, we're just going to get a guy because of top dollar. So we're looking for a guy, and we don't mind players. Look, this is the world we live in. NIL is a reality of what we're trying to do. We understand that we have to be competitive in that market, but we also need to make sure we find a player that's the right fit, that's going to be bought into what we're trying to accomplish as a team. And okay, great comment. I've made that case for Notre Dame. I would have been completely bought in. But that's not what Brian Kelly does. Brian Kelly doesn't give rational comments that say, hey, we're going to keep grinding. We're going to find that guy because we're not going to have any excuses for it. We're trying to win a championship, right? That's the standard at LSU football, is to compete for championships. And we need this to compete for championship. And so we're still out there looking for the right fit. And if we don't find one, then we're going to coach the heck out of the kids that we have now. We're going to do that anyway. And I'd have been fine with that. But that's not what he does. Brian Kelly comes out and says this. He goes, we're not in the market of buying players. Bull freaking crap. Yes, you are. You are in the market for buying players. And that's the rules. That's allowed now. You can buy players. That's one of the reasons you went to LSU in the first place, is to be able to have more resources available to buy players. You're telling me there's none of your incoming freshmen, none of the portal guys you've landed the last couple of years got a dime? Is that what you're trying to tell me? That none of the players you've landed have asked for money? All right, hey, man, I'm good not going out there and paying and just getting to a bidding war for a quality defensive tackle that gives us good depth. I think that's smart. But this notion of what Brian Kelly says is we're not here to buy players. Yes, you are. That's exactly what you do. So what we're to believe is that Notre Dame can buy players, because that's what everybody in the SEC keeps telling me, but LSU can't? LSU doesn't have the resources to buy players? Yes, you are buying players. If you want to make a case that, hey, we're not just going to go out there and just throw money around willy-nilly, and we're not going to just go get a kid who's only looking for a payday, that is perfectly reasonable, perfectly rational. But in typical Brian Kelly fashion, he has to go to this crazy extreme of we don't buy players that everybody knows is bullcrap, and it's just another excuse. And that's all this really is. This isn't Brian Kelly's not smart. Brian Kelly doesn't know the right things to say. Brian Kelly's laying a foundation for excuses for when his team doesn't succeed. If they do succeed, because this is what he did at Notre Dame for years, and I've tried to warn LSU fans about that. And if you're an LSU fan and you're in this chat, after you hit the thumbs down button, because that's what you guys do, you don't actually listen to what's being said. Just hit the thumbs down button and then cry because I had the audacity to speak the truth about your head coach, who you hated before he got hired at your school. Let's not forget that. But this is what he did for over a decade at Notre Dame. This isn't sour grapes. Oh, you're just mad he left. No, wrong guy to talk about that with. Now, I'm not that guy you want to play that with. But what you're getting is what I said he was for years, which is a guy that doesn't want to put in the work, a guy that doesn't want to make the tough decisions, a guy that doesn't want to have to deal with certain things that coaches have to deal with, and a guy that's always going to lower the standard. And the reason he's going to lower the standard is twofold. One is because then there's just not as much pressure. Brian Kelly spent his entire post-2012 career at Notre Dame lowering the standard at Notre Dame. There was always some excuse, some reason why you can't win. Well, I can't do this, I can't do that. And I remember sitting there watching the Wisconsin game in 2021, and I'm listening to Joel Klatt, because, the announcers will talk to coaches beforehand, and he's talking about how, I don't know that this team has got it, and this team's not that, good, and and I'm like, this is such the most Brian Kelly thing ever, because he's trying to convince Joel Klatt that his team's not that good, right? But why? Because when they win, he can say, look what a great job of coaching I did, because he will talk his program down to, number one, when they have success, get the glory for, oh my God, Brian Kelly went 10-3 at Notre Dame. What a wonderful coach he is, right? Even though Ty Willingham had a 10-3 season. Hey, Brian Kelly got his brains beat in the championship game, but hey, he played for the national championship. You're at Notre Dame. You're supposed to do that. And, I inherited a bad situation. I'll be willing to have this debate with you. The facilities, the overall program was in much worse shape when Brian Kelly arrived, because there was a lot of things that the field wasn't done yet. The facilities were archaic. There were some culture problems at Notre Dame that he had to fix. But I'll bet you that I could convince you that the roster was better. The one he inherited had a better roster. Michael Floyd, Manti Te'o, Zach Martin, Harrison Smith, Tyler Eifert, Kyle Rudolph. I could go on and on and on and on. And he won with that roster. Did some good things. Props to him. He also had a crazily disappointing 8-5 season with that roster. Let's not forget about that one either. He lost to South Florida with that roster, and Tulsa with that roster, and Pitt with that roster. Just don't want us to forget those things. But what he did his entire career at Notre Dame was to constantly tamp down expectations, to talk the program down, so that when they had success, he got all the glory, and then he could go to Jack Swarbrick and say, hey, man, I took a team that should have been 8-4, and we went 10-2, 11-1. Give me more money. That's who he was. That's what he did. That's why he left. Because Jack Swarbrick said, I'm not giving you any more money. I just gave you a pay raise, and you haven't done anything to earn more money. But he will tear that down, so then if they do have success, he can say, I'm the greatest thing ever because I won in spite of these things. And then he also tamps things down, because when they don't achieve success, he can say, hey, here's the reasons why we didn't achieve success. And you get mad about it all you want, but I watched this happen for a decade at Notre Dame, where he would do this. And it's kind of funny, and some of y'all are going to get mad at me now, because a lot of you are loving what I'm saying now, but some of you are going to get mad at me. Folks, I had this same argument with Notre Dame fans for a decade. A decade. I had these same arguments with Notre Dame fans. And that was even during times when I was positive on Brian Kelly. But there was a lot of Notre Dame fans. I'll tell you something right now. I got more hate from Notre Dame fans when I criticized Brian Kelly than from LSU fans when I criticized Brian Kelly. Because fans are always going to kind of defend their guy. That's what they're going to do. But this is who he's always been. This is who Brian Kelly's always been. The guy's been here 2 years at LSU, and we're hearing rumblings about how he kind of wanted the Michigan job. Why? Because that's who he is. That's who Brian Kelly is. Get used to this. That's the one thing, the most honest thing Brian Kelly ever said at Notre Dame. And I'm trying to remember, do you guys remember what game it was early in his tenure? Was it the Tulsa game in 2010, where at the end of the game, he said so Dane Chris gets hurt. Tulsa takes the lead. They're coming back. And they're already in field goal range, instead of like running the ball, maybe throwing something quick to Floyd, or even just a drop back fade to Michael Floyd, he has this unathletic, true freshman quarterback who came in the game after the starter got hurt, rolled to the right and throw a go ball into the end zone to Michael Floyd, and he got picked off. And Brian Kelly said something after the game, get used to it. And I'm like, that's the most fitting thing of Brian Kelly's tenure. He will get used to it, LSU fans, because this is who he's always going to be. And when this excuse doesn't work or something else happens, there's going to be an excuse then. When LSU doesn't live up to your expectations this year, if that happens, and I don't know if this is going to happen, I kind of like this LSU football team this year, to be honest with you. I think you made some good coaching changes. I think they made some good coaching changes on defense. I'll give Brian Kelly credit for that. He made some very good hires this offseason on defense. I like their new D coordinator. I like their D-line coach. But if it doesn't pan out, you're going to hear more excuses and more blaming of other people. And he's also the king at saying, I'm taking responsibility, and then the next 5 minutes explaining to you why it's really not his fault. And that's who he is. He's the ultimate excuse maker. And the problem that I have is actually not that he makes verbal excuses. Coaches do that stuff all the time. Some, not the great ones. The problem is that he does that, and then he kind of builds his program around that being the case. And then tailors his program to that not being the case. Well, if I tell people it's impossible to recruit certain players to Notre Dame, then guess what? I don't have to work as hard to recruit those players anymore because guess what? We can't get them. We got to shop down a different aisle. Didn't this have like shopping down a different aisle vibes like all through it? Of course it did, because that's who Brian Kelly is. You're at LSU and you can't go buy a D tackle? Really? Seriously? Isn't that why you went to LSU, or was it just for the chef? I'm confused as to what this is. And the way that he explains it is just so bad. But he does it on purpose. This is the thing. Brian Kelly's doing this on purpose. He's a smart guy. Brian Kelly's a very smart guy. Brian Kelly's a politician at heart. Grew up in a politician family. Met his mom and dad a couple times. Real nice people. Really like the Kelly family. But that's what he grew up in. He knows exactly what he's saying. He knows exactly what he's doing. This isn't he misspoke. Someone that smart and that savvy doesn't misspeak as often as Brian Kelly seems to misspeak. It's intentional. It's because it's all part of the process of lowering the standard. So when they do have success, it's like, oh my God, how many times did you guys hear? How you guys remember this on social media when LSU won 10 games and went 10-4, and like every LSU fan knew exactly how many scholarship players were on Brian Kelly's roster when he got here? Why? Because that's something that they preached about. Right? I'm going to tear things down. So if we have success, you can all say, look how great I am. But if we don't have success, I've got my built-in excuses as to why. And that's what Brian Kelly's doing. He knows that. He knows that. If recruiting starts to falter a little bit, hey, we don't buy players. Sorry, we don't buy players. You know who doesn't buy players? Dabo. You know how many portal guys Dabo Swinney got? 0. None. That's his strategy. That's his plan. But you're going to the portal and getting guys. You're going and getting top recruits that you know you're giving money to. And that's the rules now. You can do that. So don't tell me you don't buy players when you do. There's a much more rational explanation. And so why did Brian Kelly not make the rational explanation? I've seen LSU supporters and writers explain what he meant by it. And I've said, what you're saying makes total sense. If I'm a booster, I'm not going to give you $1 million to go get some D tackle that's only going to come here for money. And if for some reason things don't go his way, it's probably going to leave and have a bad attitude and be a cancer in the locker room. That's a bad investment. I didn't make all these millions of dollars that I can then give to you by making bad investments. That's a rational explanation. But do you know why Brian Kelly didn't make that explanation? Do you really think he's not smart enough? Like, do you guys really think that he didn't know that that question was coming? And I'm not even saying that like the writer told him, but you knew that was, you're a smart guy. You knew that was going to be a question. But it's because he had a different agenda in mind. He had a bigger picture agenda in mind. He's tamping down your expectations as LSU fans. He's tamping down the standard at LSU, and he's got this, well, it's a different era than when Ed Orgeron was here, or Les Miles was here, or Nick Saban was here. NIL wasn't a thing when they were here. We've got to deal with this. The SEC's got Texas and Oklahoma. It's a different era. We're doing the best we can, but we're doing the best we can work with. He did that for 10 years at Notre Dame, right? 10 years after the 2012. That's all he ever did was make excuse after excuse after excuse, tearing down the expectations, all for one reason and one reason only. So I can get all the glory if it works, and I don't get the blame if it doesn't, because it ain't my fault. And that's who Brian Kelly is. And when I see things like that, it makes me so much happier that Marcus Freeman is here. And I just saw someone say, Brian, it won't work. The SEC fan base is nuts. They won't accept missing the playoff. They are right now. Go watch the responses on Twitter from LSU fans. They are sopping it up. They are sopping it up right now. They are buying all of his stuff. Now, maybe it won't work for 10 years like it did in Notre Dame. Maybe. So, but eventually maybe they'll come around. But right now, they're all about it. They're all about it. They're sopping up. Oh, coach is saying these right things. And they're laying cover for him, just like Notre Dame fans and writers did for a decade before he was here. That's exactly who he is. That's exactly who he is. And so get used to it. Get used to it. But I'm glad that I don't have to be used to it anymore, because I don't know if Marcus Freeman's got the chops to win a title at Notre Dame. I see things that make me think he can, but he's got to prove it yet. He's gone 19-7 in 2 years. They've had some big wins. I think 7 of his 19 wins are over teams that were ranked. That's more than Brian Kelly had, I think, in the 3 or 4 seasons combined prior to arriving. Because remember, Brian Kelly's last year at Notre Dame, he went 11-1. You know how many ranked wins he had over? You know how many teams he beat that were ranked that year? 1. 2019, do you know how many? They went 11-2. You know how many teams that they beat that were ranked that year? 1. Right? So Marcus Freeman's got a lot to prove. There's no doubt he's got a lot to prove in Notre Dame. But he's got some things that I like and respect and think can be successful here. And you know what? One of the things that Marcus Freeman has at his very core that I absolutely love, and why I'm willing to give him, time to say, let's see what he can do, is because Marcus Freeman doesn't make excuses publicly or privately. And I've tried to get some excuses out of people around Notre Dame and people around him. Hey, you know what? What's going on? And I've tried to set them up with excuses like, man, I'm not hearing that. Like, no, we need to do better here. We need to do better there. I love the mentality he's brought. No excuses. No excuses. I didn't get this team ready. I'm watching Marcus Freeman. You think of this. After Notre Dame got embarrassed by Louisville and Clemson, and then follow that up with blowout wins over Wake Forest and Stanford. Imagine what Brian Kelly's talking points would have been. Imagine what his emotional state would have been. He'd have been like, look how good we are. We're finishing strong. We're doing these good things. That was his mantra. He would spin the good and just ignore the bad. But I'm watching Marcus Freeman on the sideline of the Wake Forest and Stanford games, and Notre Dame beat Stanford 45-7, and it wasn't, or Wake Forest 45-7, and it wasn't close. That was a dominant game. They blew Stanford out. Rough start early, blew Stanford out. And the whole time I'm watching this, I remember talking to some friends, and I've said this to you guys before. I'm like, he looks pissed. Like, he's not happy. If you only watched Marcus Freeman on the sidelines of the Wake Forest game, you'd have thought Notre Dame was losing 45-7. If you'd have watched Marcus Freeman on the sidelines of the Stanford game, you'd have thought, and that's all you watched, you'd have like, this isn't going well. This game is not going well. And I don't mean that as a negative, because it didn't matter to him that they were beating Wake Forest 45-7. It didn't matter to him that they were beating Stanford 56-23, because that's not why he came to Notre Dame. He didn't come to Notre Dame to blow Wake Forest out. You're supposed to blow Wake Forest out. You're supposed to blow Stanford out. You're supposed to blow a 3-9 Pitt team out. You're supposed to blow Central Michigan and Navy and Tennessee State out. You're supposed to do that. But you're also supposed to beat Ohio State. You're also supposed to beat Clemson and Louisville. That's where it came from, because Marcus Freeman knew, I didn't get the most out of this football team. And I talked to people around the program, and that's exactly how he feels. Now, was there successes this season? Of course. Were there things to build on this season? Of course. Are there things he's going to take a season and say, let's keep doing that? Of course. But I promise you this. This isn't a guess. This isn't a, I think. This isn't a, well, I'm reading between the lines. I'm telling you, I know this for a fact. There are very important people at Notre Dame in positions of decision-making within the football program that are pissed about how last season went. 10-3, top 15 ranking. They're pissed because they knew they should have been better. And you know what? I freaking love that. Am I happy they went 10-3? Of course not. They should be pissed. I'm happy they're pissed, because if you're pissed about it and you don't accept mediocrity and you don't accept 10-3 when you should have been better, guess what you're going to do? You're going to make changes. Brian Kelly goes 10-3 in 2015. Goes 10-3. blows a lead against Stanford, fails to win a game late against Clemson, gets his butt kicked in the Fiesta Bowl against Ohio State. And what did he say afterwards? They had one win over a ranked team all year. One win. Well, two. They beat Georgia Tech, who finished 3-9, but they were ranked. The only team that they beat that finished the year ranked that year was Navy. Their biggest win after Navy in 2015 was freaking Temple. Temple. Now, that was a good Temple team, but it's Temple. You're Notre Dame. And you know what? You remember what Brian Kelly said after the year? We are a play here, a play there, a this, and that. We're so close. And do you know what changes he made that offseason? None. Brought back the same strength coach that I told Notre Dame fans for a year he's not getting the job done, and got tons of hate. Tons of hate on the message. Oh, you're just a hater. You're just jealous. He can't bring Brian Van Gorder back. Guys, they went 10-3. They were a play here away. They were a play there away. If Brian Van Gorder, makes this call better, if they beat Stanford, you're not complaining. So, guys, I've been telling you since they started 5-0 that Brian Van Gorder is going to be a failure. But he made no changes. None. Marcus Freeman's team went 10-3 and set a school record for scoring, and he was pissed about the offense. So he gets rid of his receivers coach. He goes out and hires Mike Denbrock. They pay him loads of money, brings in Mike Brown, and he demands, we're going to be better. They just freaking set a scoring record, an all-time scoring record, and he's not happy about it. No, well, we were almost here. If we just would have made this one play against Ohio State, if we just would have made this one play against Clemson, we'd have had a chance. We'd have been pretty good. Let's keep rolling. No, he was pissed because that's not what he wants, because he's not going to make excuses. Now, is he good enough to win? I don't know. He hasn't done it yet. But I know this, if you make excuses, you'll never win. If you're hungry and you're never satisfied with really good because you want great, then you got a chance. And that's the thing that has me fired up about being covering Notre Dame right now, because I feel like with Marcus Freeman, with Mike Denbrock, with Al Golden, with Chad Bowden, with Mike Mickens, with Deland McCullough, guys that I know to some degree or know of them of some degree or know people that know them to some degree, none of those guys are happy with how things went last year. None of them are going to settle. You think Al Golden's looking at last year saying, hey, we ranked in the top 10 in this and top 10 in that, top 10 in that. Sure, build on it. But you know what keeps Al Golden up at nights? Fourth quarter against Louisville. The final drive against Ohio State. You're not going to hear Al Golden say, hey, listen, we kept him in the game. We had a chance to, I don't know why you're pissed at us. We did. No, because he doesn't care what we think, first of all, nor should he. He's like, we should have done better there. That's what we should have done. We should have done this. We should have made more stops against Clemson. We should have made more stops against Louisville. That's what Al Golden believes. I promise you this. Do you think Mike Denbrock at the end of the spring game was like, hey, we scored a lot of – no. He was pissed at the interceptions. He wants more of this. He wants more of that, because that is what you need to be. Think about I've said this before, some of the biggest post-game rants that Nick Saban ever had were after wins, because he wasn't happy with how his team played. He didn't care that they won. First time Brian Kelly and I had an altercation was after they beat a crap Wake Forest team by a touchdown, and he got mad that we weren't all excited about the fact that they barely beat a crap Wake Forest team on the road, right? We won the game because that's at the end of the day, he was results driven. Nick Saban's process driven. I don't care that we should have beat that team. But here's why I'm pissed, and he would go off on these rants. I'm watching Marcus Freeman win his last two games by a combined score of 101-30, and he's pissed. Why is he pissed? Because he didn't come to Notre Dame to beat Wake Forest. That's not what he came here for. He came to Notre Dame to beat Ohio State. Came to Notre Dame to beat Clemson. Came to Notre Dame to beat Georgia and Alabama. And he knew that his team should have been better. And everything that we're seeing this offseason, the coaching hires, the moves, the portal, all the changes is driven because Marcus Freeman's not happy with how things went. And he knows he's got to get better, the program's got to get better, and they've got to do more. And he's doing it with no excuses. No lowering the bar so everyone will praise him more when they win. No. What do they say at the end of everything? They say TGS. You guys know what that means? You guys know what TGS stands for? It's the gold standard. The gold standard. Because this is the standard at Notre Dame. This is what we live up to. And we don't get there, it's not good enough. Doesn't mean that there aren't things you can't praise. Doesn't mean there aren't lessons that you can learn from that. Doesn't mean that you can't take things that happened against a loss in Clemson and say, hey, there's things we can build on from that. That's called coaching. Of course there are those things, but the result is not what he wanted. There's things that he can learn from wins that they had last year, but that's not what drives. It's not, hey, you know what? We're going to be okay. We went 10-3. We scored a lot of points. We'll just go recruit better players and we'll be fine. That's not what he says. It's not good enough. I didn't come here to blow out Tennessee State. I didn't come here to blow out NC State. I didn't come here to blow out Pitt. I didn't come here to blow out Wake Forest and Stanford. I came here to win the big games. Because if you take the head coach job at Notre Dame and you don't, that's not what you care about, you're either an idiot or you're someone who's just coasting and a self-absorbed narcissist who only cares about receiving praise. And so you're going to set whatever standards you need to set to make sure that no matter what happens, you're getting praise and somebody else is getting the blame. That's how it works. That's how the previous coach was. And I'm so happy I don't have to deal with that anymore. So happy we don't have to follow that anymore. I don't have to come on here and explain what he really meant and do all those type of things. I'm glad he's gone. And I think that I don't know if Marcus Freeman is going to win a championship at Notre Dame. I have no clue. But I tell you right now, I'm a lot more confident it's going to happen that he's here than I would be if Brian Kelly was here. That I flat out know for a fact to guarantee. That's because that's what's in my heart, because I know that the previous coach was not willing to do whatever it took to win. Stay within the standards of who Notre Dame is, but do whatever it takes to win. I don't know if Marcus Freeman's got the chops to win, but I know he's going to do everything that he does have to make it happen. It may not be good enough. We'll find out. But I'd rather have a guy that's going to leave it all out there and not succeed than a guy that's too afraid to leave it all out there, because that might mean he gets blame or doesn't get praise and then fall short anyway. Give me the guy that's going to swing for the fences. That's the guy that I'm going to root for. That's the guy that I'm going to praise. I'm going to criticize him when it's needed to. There's no doubt about that. But that as a fan should have you excited. Hey, none of us know if Marcus Freeman's got the chops. None of us. But he's a guy that you can root for because you know he's going to swing for the fences. If it falls short, it falls short, and they can go find somebody else. But whoever steps in to replace him, if he fails, is going to walk into a much better situation with a much higher standard to live up to, and that's going to make him be successful. So the foundation's being laid, and that's what has me excited. And he's recruiting better. You can't recruit at Notre Dame in NIL. Yeah, you can. Marcus Freeman showing that. You can't go down to the South to get top players. You can't go down to Texas to get top players. Yes, you can, and Marcus Freeman and staff are proving that. You can't recruit top corners. You can't recruit these guys. You can't recruit those kind of guys. Yeah, you can. I'm doing it. And that's the difference. And that's why what Brian Kelly said today matters, because it is yesterday, it's exactly who he is. It's exactly why he failed to reach the ultimate plateau at Notre Dame. It's exactly why I'm so happy that when I walk around campus, I have to look at statues of Lou Holtz and Dan Devine and Eric Parsegia, Newt Rockney, and Muffet McGraw, because they're winners. And I don't have to look at a statue of a guy who won a lot but never won a championship, but convinced everyone because he's the all-time leader, he somehow deserves a statue, even though he failed to live up to that ultimate standard. I'm glad I don't have to deal with any of that stuff anymore, because that's who he was. That's why he was never going to win at Notre Dame. And that's why I'm glad he's at LSU. He's your problem now. I tried to warn y'all, but instead you wanted to make insulting comments. You want to make ignorant comments. You want to hop on my DMs, act like a little ignorant 12-year-old child, and all that kind of stuff. I get all that. There's some LSU fans that I've had some great conversations with. I'm not going to lie. I shouldn't throw them all on the same bus, but there's a lot of them. But now you're seeing exactly what I was talking about. And you can spin it and you can justify it, but I would encourage y'all to not fall for it, because when you fall for it, that's when he starts doing it more and more and more and more. If the fans say, nope, not anymore, that's not enough, this is LSU, stop making excuses, guess what? He'll know he can't do it anymore. And he'll either A, change, or B, leave. And that's what you need. But letting Brian Kelly be Brian Kelly is the worst thing to happen to your program, because, yeah, he may be more consistent than Orgeron. You're not going to win a title one year and go 6-6 the next year. But you know what you're not going to do? Win the title 1 year. You're just going to be consistently 10-2, 10-3, and just good enough to keep you happy, but not good enough to go out there and win. That's who you have as a head coach. And if you allow it to happen, then he's going to keep being that way. There's no need for change. And you can accept being just good enough. You're not going to be a champion. Say bye-bye to that until you get a new head coach. That's how I feel, and I'm glad that I don't have to deal with that anymore. So that's going to do it for the end of this segment. yes, that was therapeutic for me. I appreciate y'all allowing me to go on that rant a little bit. And I just kind of had to get that off my chest. And it just made me, because like I laughed at it at first, right? And I shared it with like Vince and Sean and everybody. I just laughed at it. But then I kind of was like, man, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that anymore. And then I just kind of started thinking about all the crap I had to deal with for years from Notre Dame fans, from Brian Kelly's staff, from the SIDs at Notre Dame when he was here. That just constantly giving me crap for, why aren't you on board? Why aren't you towing the company line? Why aren't you praising Brian Kelly for all the one? It's better than Ty Willingham. It's better than Charlie Weiss. It's better than Bob Davie. I don't give a crap. This is Notre Dame. That's not the standard. The standard's not being better than those guys who got fired. The standard is this: championships. It's Lou Holtz. It's Era. It's Rockne. It's Leahy. That's the standard. Being better than those guys, it's not the standard. And you know one thing I'll always respect about Charlie Weiss? Do you know what he said when he got fired? I didn't do a good enough job. No excuses from Charlie. He had a lot of flaws. You know how many excuses Charlie's made about why he didn't succeed? Zero. He owned it. And that's why I respect that part about him. And that's why I'll never respect Brian Kelly, because it was always everybody else's fault. I had to listen to that man throw freaking Sam Mustipher under the bus because he kept shotgun snapping in a freaking hurricane. And it's Sam Hart Mustipher's fault. I had to, his whole career I had to deal with that crap. It was always somebody else's fault, never his. But it was always on him because he's the head coach, and that's where the buck stops. And he's the one that tamped down the standard. He's the one that lowered the bar. And there's still a lot of Notre Dame fans that have accepted it. That also pisses me off. There's still fans who will say, we can't win here. Why? Because Brian Kelly said you can't win here. Charlie Weiss never said that. Charlie Weiss never made that excuse. Brian Kelly did. Ty Willingham did. Bob Davie did. Lou never used that excuse. Charlie never used that excuse. And Marcus Freeman's not using those excuses because they know that you can win there. Doesn't mean you will, but you can. And that's a great place to end it. So